Hey there, curious minds and the delightfully bored. Welcome to another episode of Backstories You Didn't Ask For, the show that digs up the dirt on the most random yet fascinating tidbits of history. I'm your host, Jim Chase, and today we're diving into one of the most absurd military campaigns ever recorded, the Great Emu War. Yes, you heard that right, a war against emus. So grab your helmets and your sense of humor because we're about to march into a battle so ridiculous it makes Monty Python look like a documentary. Our story begins in the early 1930s in the vast rugged outback of Western Australia. The Great Depression had hit hard, and things were rough. But for the farmers of Western Australia, there was a menace far worse than economic hardship: emus. Yeah, that's right. These flightless birds which look like a Dr. Seuss character on steroids. They were causing havoc. You see, the government had encouraged veterans of World War I to take up farming on the land, promising prosperity and stability. What they didn't mention was that these soldiers would soon face a new enemy, a relentless horde of emus that would make even the toughest war veterans shake in their boots. The emus, drawn by the allure of recently cultivated crops, began to migrate inland in massive numbers. Picture it, thousands of emus descending on farms like a biblical plague, trampling and devouring everything in their path. It was less Farmer in the Dell and more Nightmare on Elm Street. So what exactly makes an emu such a formidable foe? For starters, these aren't your garden variety chickens. Emus are big. We're talking up to 6 feet tall and around 100 pounds. They can run at speeds up to 30 miles per hour and have legs powerful enough to tear down fences and kick the living daylights out of anything that gets too close. Oh, and did I mention they travel in packs? Because of course they do. By October 1932, the emu invasion had reached critical levels. The farmers, desperate to save their crops, turned to the government for help. And when the government is involved, you know things are about to get interesting or disastrously funny. Enter Sir George Pierce, the Minister of Defense. Pierce, who clearly didn't have enough on his plate managing an entire country's defense, decided that the best solution to this feathered fiasco was military intervention. After all, how hard could it be to take down a bunch of oversized birds? Spoiler alert, a lot harder than you'd think. Pierce deployed Major J.P.W. Meredith of the 7th Heavy Battery of the Royal Australian Artillery to lead the operation. Meredith, armed with 2 Lewis guns and 10,000 rounds of ammunition, probably thought he was going on a fun little hunting trip. Little did he know, he was about to embark on one of the most laughable military campaigns in history. On November 2nd, 1932, the Emu War officially began. Meredith and his men, along with a couple of intrepid farmers, set out to confront their avian adversaries. They found their first mob of emus near Campion. With bated breath, they set up their machine guns and prepared for battle. What followed was a scene straight out of a slapstick comedy. The first battle of the Great Emu War took place at Campion, and it was an unmitigated disaster. As the soldiers opened fire, the emus scattered in all directions. Turns out, emus are surprisingly good at evasive maneuvers. The gunners managed to kill only a handful of birds while the rest escaped, leaving behind a trail of trampled crops and bemused soldiers. Undeterred, Major Meredith decided to take the fight to the emus. The next day, they set up an ambush near a dam where they expected the emus to congregate. This time, they had a better plan. Wait until the emus were within range and then let loose. Simple, right? Well, not quite. As the emus approached, the soldiers opened fire and promptly jammed their machine guns. By the time they got it working again, the emus had disappeared. Score: emus 2, humans 0. The emus, it turned out, were not only fast but annoyingly clever. They divided into smaller groups, making it nearly impossible for the soldiers to get a clear shot. Major Meredith later described them as highly organized, which is probably the nicest way anyone has ever said, "We got outsmarted by birds." For the next few days, the soldiers continued their campaign, but with little success. They chased emus around the countryside, firing wildly and mostly missing. The emus, meanwhile, seemed to be having the time of their lives, dodging bullets, trampling crops, reckless abandon. It was like a game of tag, but with more feathers and less dignity. By November 8th, after nearly a week of skirmishes, it was clear that the emus were winning. Major Meredith's troops had expended about 2,500 rounds of ammunition and only managed to kill around 200 emus. That's a kill ratio of about 1 in 12, or as I like to call it, a colossal waste of time and bullets. The public and the press began to take notice of the absurdity of the situation. Headlines like, "Emus outwit army," and "Emu War a farce" started cropping up in newspapers. The government, embarrassed and likely wondering what they'd been thinking, decided to pull the plug on the operation. On November 8th, the Emu War was officially called off. Major Meredith and his men returned to their barracks, presumably to lick their wounds and reconsider their career choices. But the story doesn't end there. Like any good sequel, the emus came back with a vengeance. By late November, the emu problem had reached crisis levels again, and the farmers, now at their wits' end, demanded action. Reluctantly, the government authorized a second round of military intervention. Yay! On December 10th, Major Meredith and his men were back in the field, ready to take another crack at the emus. This time, they were a bit more strategic. They mounted one of the machine guns on a truck, hoping that the mobility would give them an edge. Spoiler alert, it didn't. The truck-mounted machine gun proved to be an even bigger disaster. The rough terrain made aiming nearly impossible, and the emus once again scattered at the first sign of danger. In one particularly humiliating incident, the truck hit a bump, the gunner fell off, and the emus escaped unscathed. Score, emus 3, humans 0. Despite these setbacks, Major Meredith and his men soldiered on. Over the next few weeks, they managed to kill more emus, but the birds' numbers remained overwhelming. By December 10th, the soldiers had fired about 9,860 rounds and killed approximately 986 emus. That's a hit rate of about 1 in 10, a slight improvement, but still laughably inefficient. Eventually, the government decided enough was enough. The second phase of the Emu War was called off, and the soldiers were withdrawn for good. The emus, victorious and presumably strutting around like they owned the place, continued to roam the outback. Major Meredith later remarked, "If we had a military division with the bullet-carrying capacity of these birds, it would face any army in the world." High praise for a bunch of oversized chickens. So what happened after the Emu War? The farmers left to fend for themselves eventually found other ways to deal with the emu problem. The government offered a bounty system, paying a small reward for every emu killed. This proved to be far more effective than a military intervention, as local hunters knew the terrain and the birds' habits far better than the soldiers did. The Emu War became a legend, a bizarre footnote in the annals of military history. It was a cautionary tale about underestimating your enemy, especially when that enemy is a horde of fast, clever, and surprisingly resilient birds. The Great Emu Wars left an indelible mark on Australians' history. It's a story that's been told and retold, each time with a bit more embellishment and a lot more laughter. It's a reminder of the unpredictable nature and the folly of human arrogance. After all, how many other countries can say they lost a war to birds? The Emu War also served as a lesson in humility for the Australian military and government. It showed that sometimes the simplest solutions, like hiring local hunters, are the most effective. And it restored the idea that nature, no matter how ridiculous it may seem, has a way of humbling even the mightiest of human endeavors. Today, the Great Emu War is a beloved piece of Australian folklore. It's been referenced in books, movies, and even video games. It's a story that continues to captivate and amuse, proving that history doesn't always have to be serious to be memorable. Let's take a moment to consider the human side of this story. Major J.P.W. Meredith, the man in charge of this avian debacle, had a distinguished military career. Before leading the charge against the emus, he had served valiantly in World War I. So how did he feel about being remembered not for his bravery on the battlefield, but for his comically futile attempts to curb an emu invasion? In interviews after the war, Meredith took a surprisingly good-humored view of the whole affair. He recognized the absurdity of the situation and was able to laugh at his misadventures. Still, you have to wonder if he ever cursed his luck for being a man forever associated with one of the most bizarre military campaigns in history. It's a bit like being remembered not for your PhD in physics, but for that one time you got stuck in a tree trying to rescue a cat. Now let's flip the script and imagine the emu's perspective on this whole fiasco. Picture it. A bunch of emus minding their own business, enjoying the bountiful crops, when they're suddenly being hunted by soldiers with machine guns. It must have been like a scene from an avian action movie, Emu Hard, or Mission Impossible. The emus, with their natural speed and agility, probably thought it was some sort of elaborate game. And considering they managed to outmaneuver and outwit the soldiers at nearly every turn, you could argue that they were the true victors of the Great Emu War. It's a reminder that sometimes nature's creatures are more resilient and adaptable than we give them credit for. The Great Emu War and the subsequent bounty system had a significant impact on the local ecosystem. Emus, while problematic for farmers, play a crucial role in their natural habitat. They help with seed dispersal, control insect populations, and contribute to the overall health of the ecosystem. The mass culling of emus disrupted these ecological balances, leading to unforeseen consequences. It's a reminder that nature operates in a complex, interconnected way, and that interventions, no matter how well-intentioned, can have ripple effects. The Emu War serves as a cautionary tale about the importance of considering ecological factors when devising solutions to environmental problems. The story of the Great Emu War has continued to capture the imagination of modern media. It's been the subject of documentaries, comedic sketches, and even feature films. Each retelling adds a new layer of humor and insight, keeping the story fresh and engaging for new audiences. One particularly memorable portrayal was in the 2019 satirical film The Emu War, which depicted the events with a mix of historical accuracy and over-the-top comedy. The film became a cult hit, showcasing the enduring appeal of this bizarre chapter in history. Believe it or not, the Great Emu War has found its way into educational curriculums. Teachers use the story to engage students in discussions about history, ecology, and critical thinking. It's a perfect example of how a seemingly ridiculous event can provide valuable lessons. Thanks for tuning into Backstories You Didn't Ask For. I'm Jim Chase, and I hope you've enjoyed this deep dive into the hilariously absurd Great Emu War. From the ill-fated military campaign to the emu's ultimate victory, it's a story that's equal parts ridiculous and fascinating. Remember to rate and review this podcast, because just like the emus, we thrive on a bit of attention and a lot of perseverance. Until next time, stay curious, keep laughing, and maybe think twice before you underestimate a bunch of birds. Cheers!